BOD 2014 final rounds conducted review by the Prime Minister.
Don't speak.
British American Tobacco contributes a substantive amount of $5 million to Republican individuals in order to lobby for policies that generally are in favor for tobacco companies, like for example, less taxation on cigarettes, for example, and all of that. This shows that policy making, a huge part of the legislation, is immediately affected just because money is involved. This harms the amazing tenet that is democracy right now, simply because policies are not represented by individuals, are not represented by values, but simply represented by a small few individuals who are able to contribute as much. But we understand that the debate is primarily about the cap. That means we have to admit now that the Supreme Court agrees to a certain extent that the individuals are able to contribute, and we agree to that because we believe that everyone who believes on a certain party or everyone believes on a certain policy should be more likely to be able to contribute in order for their political parties to flourish. But at the same time, we have to agree that the cap is also there to level out the opportunity or to level out the ability of an individual anywhere across the state or anywhere across the federation to be able to contribute equally or to be able to contribute as much as most other individuals around the territory. So with that being said, why is the cap really important? Because if we immediately allow an influx of individuals who will be able to contribute a substantial amount, much more than the rest of society, then this causes a huge problem. Let's look exactly at this problem. Because the absence of this particular cap, an individual can pump in as much as money as they possibly want in a political campaign. This is bad because now there is more likelihood for an individual to be singled out when it comes to being pandered to by political campaigns or by political parties. Meaning that while other people will be able to pay much less, one individual will be able to pay much more, and a political campaign will be more likely to pander to this particular individual because they lobby to these political parties. That's a huge problem. A lot of different companies like British American Tobacco, for example, are among these. So what we believe in is simply that we regret the particular decision and we believe that the cap should maintain. No, thank you. So what we are striving for as our stance is that campaigns should adhere to values of the people that they want to represent, as many as they want, instead of a specific few who can pay the substantial more of money to these political campaigns. And the burden that this side of the House will want to prove to you is that this particular cap is fair and justified in a democracy. And what we want opposition to come up and prove to us is how exactly allowing an individual arbitrarily to be able to pay as much as they want, really that fair to other campaigns who may not be able to attract other individuals, or other individuals who may not even want to, who may not be able to pay as much as these particular individuals. So let's talk about how it harms the process of democracy. First level, representation. Democracy comes from the fact that an individual will be able to be represented as much as any other individual. That means everyone in the state of, say, Texas will be able to be represented by one political campaign or one political party based on a value that they believe in that political party actually adheres to. But the problem here, no thank you, is that because of the existence of this cap, the absence of this cap, not everyone then will be able to be represented the same exact way. Because now, this encourages individuals to be affiliated with high-profile companies, for example, no thank you, high-profile companies, for example, who would pay these individuals to endorse these political campaigns. Like, for example, British American Tobacco would then pay me or would then lobby with me to contribute as well, because they will be able to say pay me, or they will be able to provide me certain interests that I may possibly want, so that I will contribute to these political parties, so that it'll be easier for these companies or these lobby groups to be able to rally or to be able to lobby for policy that they can possibly want from these political parties. So that's a bad thing. But secondly, let's talk specifically about, okay, fine, yeah.
But if the population were say against smoking laws in general, then the same politician who takes money from VAT will suffer at the polls eventually, right? Then there's no incentive to take money from VAT. There's no support for smoking.
The problem with that is that now there is a more likelihood for an individual's particular interest to be much more considered as compared to any other. Because regardless of whether a general population is against smoking, or regardless of whether the general population is against, say, abortion, for example, then it doesn't matter. Because if, let's say, a political campaign wins in an election, they are more likely to lobby for policies that are for people that they actually pay for. So it doesn't necessarily matter as to whether people vote for them for a different reason, because they are going to rally for policies for a completely different reason that an individual would then rally for. Okay, go ahead.
Are they fair? Okay, if the people don't like smoking laws, then abortion wouldn't have any reason to take money from a civic company, right? Because he will suffer at the polls. Why would he do that? Why would he take money from a cause that no one supports?
Simply because it will be easier for them to be attractive to voters. The fact remains that a lot of these political campaigns require a lot of money and a lot of funding to be able to, say, broadcast their political campaigns, to be able to, say, produce banners. Nothing simple as producing banners. The fact remains that political campaigns require a lot of money. So the question now is, where exactly should they even get these monies to begin with? So, and here's the reason why it's much more fairer with a cap. It's much more fairer with a cap, simply because of the fact that now any individual, like say maybe perhaps Noel, or perhaps even me, will be able to have more likelihood to contribute to a political campaign as much as everyone else in a particular society. So the reason this is a good thing is because of the fact that now I will be represented the same way as other people, because other people are paying as much as I am, regardless of whether maybe perhaps one person would have much more has a higher financial capacity to pay. It doesn't matter, because of this cap, he won't be able to pay as much as that. So by the end of the day, what we can really establish from this side of the house here is that in the case of democracy, representation is everything. It doesn't matter as to whether how much money a person has. It doesn't matter as to how much more money a person has as compared to other people, but the fact remains that it's just a clear intention to contribute to a financial campaign that a political campaign that they believe in, rather than to just lobby for a particular policy or lobby for their particular interest to begin with. Thank you.
And the Prime Minister is the opposition or like
Yeah.
Can I get your name?
Vincent.
Hi, Vincent.
I know well, or no, I don't know which it is. I can't remember.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'm bad with names. So one important clarification before I move into anything in this debate is whether or not corporations qualify as individuals in this debate. Because coming out of opening government, the first thing we hear is nothing but examples of corporations, and specifically British American Tobacco. We're not sure on side opposition why we should qualify like corporations as individuals, because they're obviously separate entities. But for the sake of engagement, let's just pretend like corporations are included in this debate. Anyway, so two things we need to ask before I move into my substantive material. First, how do politicians decide their stance, and how do they like emerge on or decide on things like all their policies? Second, is democracy actually upheld when we allow individuals to donate however much they want? First question, how do politicians decide their stance? Coming out of opening government, we hear this argument that people decide their stance by whoever pays them. We think that's not necessarily the case. There's not a direct correlation between the amount of money you have in your campaign and the amount of votes you get within the context of an election. We think that's what democracy is about, right? A rich man's vote is worth the same amount as a poor individual's vote. We don't think necessarily that means that an individual should only be allowed to pay as much as a poor man can. But more importantly, we think politicians always aim to get elected first, right? That's their own first and primary gain. So even if it meant Obama had to go like campaign among the grassroots, he would rather do that than sell out and buy a huge corporation, because he knew he would give up a lot of his voter base if he did that. So we think first and foremost, every politician's first and primary aim is to find a group of voters, no thank you, large enough for them to get into power and for them to stay there. So we don't think there's necessarily an incentive for them to like go and completely follow like any kind of corporate like line, unless there's a significant voter base behind that. So we reject this characterization from opening government. No, thank you. Second, how is democracy upheld? Because the idea of representation coming out of opening government was an extraordinarily strange one, right? They said individuals' ability to represent or to be represented in democracy should be checked or should be observed and like enforced by like some kind of ban on how much each individual is allowed to give. We don't think that's the case. But more importantly, we contend, no thank you, that the ability for an individual to give to the cause or a specific politician, no thank you, is like completely dependent on his own financial autonomy and has nothing to do with his right to be represented. If you want to be represented, that's the ballot box for you, right? We don't necessarily recognize how contributing to the election process alters or changes this ability for you to still be represented at the voting box. No thank you. So having that with like most of their material, let's move to my two substantives for today. Before that, sure, closing.
Opening opposition is running a compound case. If there is no impact whatsoever with the correlation in cash and votes, there is no debate there. You cannot negate that advertising does bring people to vote for certain people because they are ideas that they want to sell.
Oh, okay, that's okay. First and foremost, have fun proving that. Second and more importantly, we don't have to contend that individuals have like that elections and like amount of cash are necessarily correlated. We'll just argue that people have the right to do so, and whether or not it has an impact is completely irrelevant to this debate. So first, two things we want to discuss. One, whether or not the Supreme Court had the ability or the right to even make this decision in the very first place, given it was something that opening government chose to convene in law. Secondly, let's talk about why an individual's right to donate is important. So first, why is it that the Supreme Court and not any other body had the right to make this decision? No, thank you. We think first and foremost, we need to understand the Supreme Court's like position or place within the US balance of power. And we think that the objective of the Supreme Court, or any court in general, is to protect the Constitution no matter what. We think under these circumstances, what's important to note is that the cap on the individual federal limit or a cap on this limit is unconstitutional by their standards, right? So we don't even think that it's legitimate for them to bring in social concerns, because that's not the job of the Supreme Court to decide. We think at the end of the day, the Supreme Court decided that it was illegitimate because it unfairly infringed on things like on individuals' ability to financial autonomy, and like by extension things like self-determination, things like property rights were all unfairly infringed upon as well. That's why we think they found it unconstitutional, and that's why they abolished it. We think any other social impact of this, as long as not affecting the Constitution, can be resolved by any other political body. It does not necessarily require the same ban, because we just keep getting struck down, because like this means, as declared by the Supreme Court, as a balance to the Congress is declared as too extreme and massively draconian. So we think that first and foremost, the Supreme Court has this ability and has this rights within its powers to protect the Constitution in this manner. But second and more importantly, why do we think that an individual's right to donate is therefore important? No, thank you. Because there's a couple of reasons for this, right? First, because we believe that an individual's ability to donate to a cause is like his ability to do two things, right? First, to exercise his right to financial autonomy in a specific way, but second and more importantly, the ability for him to exercise his right to political participation in a fixed sense. We think, what does this mean? This means that an individual's ability to donate to the cause is to some extent representative, or can be seen as representative, of him using his right to be like democratic, right? So we think that in that sense, an individual's right to donate is important. Why is this individual's right to donate whatever amount he wants more important than an individual, than for everybody to be able to donate the same thing? We think the reason is simple, because we don't think democracy is measured by sheer amounts per se, right? The same way we don't place a value judgment on the way individuals make decisions at the ballot box, we cannot place a value judgment on how much money is good money or good measure of the individual's support. We therefore think that it's important that we allow individuals to express their support in like whatever extent they deem fit. If that means a vote at the ballot box, fine. If that means a vote at the ballot box plus $10 million, that's fine too. We don't think there should be a limit or limitation placed on the way individuals can express their support for specific politicians, parties, or causes. That is just not fair and not constitutional under the circumstances. But let's look at the last thing. Why do we think that therefore that democracy or as a whole becomes more transparent? Because it's not as if these donations go completely unnoticed, right? The super PACs received by the Republicans were met with a huge amount of uproar. And we think the result here is simple, right? That the kinds of underhanded, subtle corporate measures that like government wants to insist will be insinuated will be seen as long as there's some degree of transparency in the system. we think this means that the ability for this to level or change the outcome of an election or even alter the kind of policies that politicians take on is extraordinarily limited. And that's why we're very proud to stand for the people's ability to represent who they want in the manner in which they wish.
Yes. Yeah.
Not seditious. The right to donate, the right to be represented in an election process. Well, let's get this clear, especially in the United States when you talk about an election campaign, like the last one we previously had. It's all about money, isn't it? It's all about popularity. To regards where leader of opposition said money doesn't necessarily translate to vote, we beg to differ. If you look at the last election in terms of the amount of money that each candidate received from individuals, from lobby groups, we saw that the money was used to blitz a campaign that ignored a lot of issues. When the Republicans received significant amount of money from pharmaceuticals, from the National Rifles Association, that money was used on a misinformation campaign that denied discourse on things like guns rights, that denied discourse on regulations by the FDA. These kind of issues are harmful. And especially, let's not forget how this proposal basically allows for you a limitless cap. What's stopping lobby groups, individuals within lobby groups, to use funds from lobby groups to channel into individuals, to channel into campaigns? That kind of limitless, restrictless policy brings a lot of harms. We like to engage first upon this whole idea of the right to be represented, the right to donate. The problem with this policy to begin with is that not everyone can afford $10 million, $10,000 even, to contribute to any party. What happens when you allow this limitless cap is that you force candidates to gravitate towards certain individuals who have certain collective causes, who have certain collective interests, say for example, stances on gun rights, stances on immigration. This forces candidates to gravitate towards these individuals. Moreover, when we see the rise of super PACs, like what happened with the Romney campaign, was used on a massive, brilliant campaign to misinform individuals, to talk about issues that were trivial to begin with. And even further, Madam Speaker, the kind of super PAC that was incurred because of the kind of donations that happened was that you saw that political parties were much more interested than to have an arms race on how much money you can collect in a war chest rather than to engage with people. You saw how the response from the Democratic Party and the Democratic candidate after the super PAC was announced for Romney was that the Democrats themselves were canvassing for more donations from more individuals who were much more able to afford. It denies you critical time and critical opportunity to engage to the people on the ground rather and doing more important things to begin with. But before that,
your side is not going to ban misinformation campaigns.
No, there's no. We're not the whole idea of misinformation campaign or campaigns in general is that there's always a counter narrative to it. When you talk about the counter narratives that happen with regards to allegations by the Republican Party, for example, it was responded, for example, by the Democratic Party with funds using for a re-information campaign. What happens when you remove this cap is that you would have a propensity of an imbalance in terms of whether or not a certain party or a certain candidate being able to respond to it because there seems to be one party having much more funds than the other. But moving on to this idea of the right to donate, then what happens then? The harms happen then when individuals in swing states, for example, like Oklahoma, wouldn't necessarily have the kind of leverage or the kind of clout for candidates to debate or concern themselves with issues that matter to these states. It would then deny them the right of being represented because an individual's right to be represented is proportionate to the amount of money they have. Necessarily, do we see, Madam Chair, in the tenets of democracy to have certain limitations? Yes, we do. We limit, for example, the amount of contributions corporations we give because we fear that corporations might use these candidates as proxies to further their causes. What's going to stop individuals with similar interests or more or less the same interest of these lobby groups from doing the same thing. They need to address that in terms of trying to provide a clean and fair election, in terms of providing equal information towards the people. We don't think removing the cap would serve democracy in any way. We don't think having a limitless amount that Republicans or conservatives or liberals and left-wing groups or left-wing individuals being able to commit would anyway serve the country or serve democracy, especially when the focus of the election or focus of the campaign goes towards campaigns that are directed towards misinformation, because they have much more money at hand, they have much more capacity to engage in these kind of activities, rather than engaging with the people, for example, who can't necessarily afford a $10,000 contribution to these parties. It disenfranchises the people away from the system, creating a cloud that only the rich or the wealthy can enter, disenfranchising individuals in rural areas who are poor or can't afford to talk to these candidates because they don't have deeper pockets. What happens then is that you perpetuate a cycle that only individuals who have certain amount of money, a large amount of money, can contribute, can engage to. You gravitate candidates towards issues that are much more corporate in nature, or individuals with necessarily being denied avenue to have their issues heard. And this basically doesn't serve any way whatsoever the purpose of democracy. A cap is there, Madam Chair, to provide protection and to provide the kind of limitations in terms of the abuse that corporate America, for example, has perpetuated. Allowing individuals a limitless amount of money to be donated to these political candidates doesn't serve democracy anyway. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, we stand for John Stuart Mill's principle that you cannot take away anyone's freedom to do anything one unless you can show concrete harm that results from that person's freedom to do so. So this is how I'm going to look at the debate. Firstly, I'm going to look at the no harm argument, what we raised earlier, and generally how we don't think they've shown harm at all. I'm going to take a look at the importance of freedom. The argument was already raised at my first speaker. I'm going to look at something new here about the benefits of having politicians close to rich people and rich corporations. So firstly, the no harm idea. We don't think up to now there's been a proven link between money and what happens in governance. We don't think politicians become corrupt and make false promises to voters only to please 3 or 4 or 5 rich individuals in the economy. Why is that so? Because A, politicians still need the vote from everyone in the country to get into office. Secondly, politicians need the vote as well when they want to be re-elected. So what happens is if in a first term, you start doing things that are very different from what you promised the politicians, and it turns out, after people check, the filing records of who paid what to who, that you actually were indebted to BAT, then more likely than not, you're going to be booted out in the next race. So that's why we argue there's little or at all any link between what happens on the ground, and in the back booth, what happens in governance. Secondly, we'll point out, Madam Speaker, that even if there's any relevance now of money to what happens in politics, we think there's still pretty much a very equal playing field out there in elections. How so? Firstly, you point out that the cost of campaigning has actually dropped to a very large extent, because now, after what Obama showed to us when he first ran for the presidential office, that most campaigning now is done online. You use emails, you have websites, and all of that is cheap, much cheaper than in the old days, I'd say in the 80s or 70s, where you literally had to have massive rallies and have large town hall meetings to try to be noticed. So the truth is the cost of campaigning has gone down, the cost of elections is cheaper. So even if money is at all relevant, politicians who are not generally funded by rich individuals still have an equal chance of getting known and getting their message heard by the public. Secondly, we'll point out that the media, we'll point out secondly, is that rich donors and rich corporations exist across all spectrums of the political spectrum, all across the political spectrum. Anyway, you've got big like organizations like Fox that generally supports Republicans, and then you've got Google and other very liberal progressive organizations that support Democrats. So they exist across all spectrums of the population. Hence, we don't see any harm that might result from having access to one and not to the other. Thirdly, we'll point out is that you don't need to get money from a rich individual to have money when you're running for office. You can do what Obama did and reach out to the grassroots if you like. It's an option that politicians have at their table, and they can choose to do so if they want to. And they do so when they think it makes sense, because given the various constituencies that they come from. Thirdly, I'll point out, and this is where I'll go into the arguments about equality as well, that it's not fair to expect every politician to raise money by simply asking every common man to do so. Because the truth is, in some countries, particularly in America, some constituencies of people are more willing to give money than others. It's a common fact that the average Republican voter doesn't give money. Like, the average guy just doesn't give money. It's just how they realize. And the average Democrat, particularly when Obama first ran for office, were emotionally charged. They were running on the yes we can campaign. They're more willing to give money. So if you force politicians to only rely on the common man, the risk you might run then is some politicians who are very viable, have got very strong viewpoints, and honestly should be heard, might not be heard at all, because the constituencies don't give money in general. So and the only ones who give money are those who are rich. So which is where it's unfair. So even if money was at all relevant, the risk is you're running, you're going to hurt some politicians who honestly deserve to be heard online or anywhere else. Before I go on, yes, sir.
What incentivizes an individual or individuals affiliated with lobby groups to go as far as an unreasonable amount of 10 million for a campaign?
What would stop
what incentivizes them?
To give money?
Yes.
Yeah, because and this is where I go to argue about freedom, right? And this is why he already raised. I don't think that you delve into it. Someone's right to give money is contingent on his right to express himself and to participate in the political process. This is what Benson already espoused earlier. And we don't think they should put any judgment on how much he gives and why that's a bad, good thing. So, for example, we don't put any limit on someone's ability to participate in a campaign by volunteering his time, right? Like, we don't say every individual can only volunteer 5 hours in a week, to help out with Obama, because that's unfair. If it's a mad, hardcore Obama supporter, and you spend like his whole day, all night, just like put posters, we know that. Why? Because it's his right to contribute. It's how he gets closure. It's how he feels he's playing a meaningful role in a democracy. So similarly with money. When a rich person gives money, of course, it might help us understand why we don't give much money, because we're not rich in general, most of us, right? But when he does so, okay, that's how much he truly believes in the cause. It's a way of participating. So we argue it's not fair to develop his right to participate and feel that he had at least a say in some form or the other. Like, some rich guys aren't willing to spend 5 weeks out there in the fields on the streets and campaigning. They will just give money. That's their form of participating. So you have to show concrete right, harm, before getting with that particular right. Now let's go to the money argument about the benefit of being close to rich people and also to rich corporations. We will argue there's also benefit to politicians understand and getting to network with rich individuals and rich corporations, because they can understand their interests, which also deserve to be understood and heard. And it's important because more often not, what are they looking for? They're looking for ways to make generally the economy better. They're looking for ways to create high profit environments where generally the economy grows. This is a good benefit that results from politicians getting to know corporations better, but that happens through closer networking. And the truth is, what is good business means making more money, right? So we argue it's very important for them to get to close to the industry. Yes?
So, having a cap doesn't necessarily deny candidates from engaging with these businesses.
Yeah, but exactly. So there's no harm that results from, saying they're not denied, but at least they have a chance to get to meet them and a reason to get to know them if they want to, especially if you're arguing that the only way they will meet someone is because they get money from him. So exactly, so if the reason why I meet someone is I get money from him, then the benefit from that interaction is I get to understand the interest, and those interests are actually good interests to think about and consider, as long as it doesn't corrupt the political process. I.e., when he's in office, if he delivers on his promises, he doesn't go behind our backs and pass laws that are contrary to what he had proposed when he's running for office, that is perfectly fine. So this is how we are doing, even if argument in response to a case so far brought by you. So in summary, Madam Speaker, one last point. Your policy also harms minority groups who are generally poorer in most parts of society, like blacks, for example, or like some Indians in Singapore, right? So, and often the only ones who can actually contribute are rich individuals who have the time to give money and also the time to get involved. And you have this policy, you make it almost even harder for the minorities to get heard and represented, because those guys simply don't have any other avenue. I'm working 5 jobs, I don't have any time to go out there and play a role. But at least if a rich brother-in-law who's a millionaire can give some money, it helps to at least create some kind of connection and get your interest heard. So there are more benefits. We just don't see a harm. We think it's a show of harm before any rights can be unfairly taken away. We beg to oppose.
Deputy Leader of the speech. Now let's invite the member of government.
A. Data nila.
How's one the APs do? Oh, Jesus.
We think the Deputy Leader of Opposition made a very convenient concession when he said politicians are affected by the fact that some constituencies pay more than other constituencies. He just conceded that money does play a part at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, if individuals do eventually get harmed by the fact that there is lack of money in their campaign contributions. But before I move on to my arguments, side opening government talked to you specifically about why certain policies are more, or that corporate interests are more likely to be pandered to because they have more money. What I'm going to extend on in closing government is simple. I'm going to talk to you about how this exacerbates the gap between the rich and the poor, because politics are generally swayed towards the rich individuals rather than the poor, and this will reflect on general practical policies as well. But before that, a couple of rebuttals. The first question Leader of Opposition asked was, did the Supreme Court have the right to make the decision? We agree, yes, they have the right, no contention. The question is, did they make the right decision? That one you answer first. Secondly, they argue that there's an individual's right to donate and it's unfair to stop them. This is the problem, Madam Chair. The massive income inequalities in most democracies around the world that faced by societies are the massive problems that make it unfair in the first place. Individuals who have greater access to money compared to other individuals who don't have as much access to that money have a greater voice in that society. How can voices be heard being the pure principle of democracy when some people have a bigger voice than other people, Madam Chair, just because they have money? That's what makes it unfair. That's what gives us the right to stop that individual's right to donate at the end of the day, because we need equitable impact rather than a biased impact at the end of the day, Madam Chair. The next thing they told us is that it's equitable because campaign costs have dropped and now you have the internet to campaign on. Firstly, this is lies. You still have to buy domains, you still have to pay for advertisements, which rich campaigners have more money to do so in the first place. But at the end of the day, this argument is a cop-out. Even if the campaign costs have dropped, that doesn't mean it's equitable. It just means it's dropped, but still some people have greater access to it compared to other people, Madam Chair. This argument makes no sense. The next thing they told us is that politicians network better, and therefore this is a great thing. Firstly, this is better in our policy, because in our policy, if it's equitable contributions, politicians are more likely to talk to everyone, regardless of whether they are rich or poor. In your policies, politicians are more likely to network with those who are rich, Madam Chair, and try to get their opinions, try to gain their perspectives, if that is somewhat a benefit under your policy. We think it's perfectly fine for a poor person to have opinions that could contribute to the economy, but politicians apparently won't talk to them because there is no incentive in networking with them at the end of the day. But before I move on to my extension, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. However, considering the fact that they will be too busy looking for fundraising, considering how there's a cap, don't you think that they would not have more time for their official duties as opposed to just fundraising?
You answered your own question, because if they're too busy finding for money, they're actually talking to people while doing that. So they're not too busy to talk to people. My argument is that, yeah, that's all. Thank you. My argument is this, Madam Chair. If individuals can make campaign donations, we think there is a greater leverage for the rich. Why is this so? Because politicians, more often than not, are in it to win it. Even the most decent politician, even the most moral politicians will say, let me get into power first, then I will think about your policies and I'm more likely to pass your policies, Madam Chair. We think in these situations, they have an active incentive to pander to the perspectives of the rich rather than the poor, because there is more campaign influence in getting from the rich. Even if campaign costs have dropped, they will still pander to the rich because it's easier or better to advertise on Google rather to advertise on freemalaysiatoday.net, Madam Chair, which is the severe disadvantage that poorer campaigners have, even if campaign costs have dropped. We think it will be harder to pass policies in these situations that necessarily protect the poor. As I've said, the main problem of this policy that comes about is because of income inequality. It's not fair if we just make that a lot more worse. What are we talking about, Madam Chair? No, thank you. In terms of like progressive taxes, for example, because politicians are more likely to pander towards the perspectives of the rich, especially rich individuals, this is when they cannot be passed, Madam Chair, because rich individuals obviously don't want to be taxed more. And generally, progressive taxes have been solving the problem of inequality in most countries, Madam Chair. In these situations, politicians don't want to pass those policies because they have rich people funding them in the first place. No, thank you. Then you obviously have to draw that correlation between whether or not money has any influence, right? Because this has been a very important contention. We do think money has significant influence, Madam Chair, especially if you have more airtime on television, especially when you get to stick more posters on people's faces where they see it every day as opposed to someone who's poorer. That's why in a state like California that is so super liberal, a policy like Prop 8 to legalize gay marriage was not passed because the Catholic Church outfunded any other corporation that supported gay marriage 10-1, Madam Chair, when they were able to gain more access to that money, when they were able to give more money into campaigning for that idea of not passing gay marriage. This will apply to an individual as well, not just any entity. No, thank you. But why can't poor people counter this with their critical mass? Actually, I'll take you. Yes.
Or maybe the reason why Prop 8 didn't pass because most people in California don't like gay marriage. How about that theory?
It's generally assumed that California is a very liberal state, and I think it's also because the Catholic Church has outfunded people 10-1 that they have a bigger influence at the end of the day, Madam Chair. And especially in terms of polls before the election, before the referendum, when individuals were swayed to passing gay marriage in the first place. But the second question we need to ask is why can't poor people counter this with their critical mass when there are rich people paying politicians to support them? This is because it's very easy to contribute as an individual. When you have a lot of money, you just give $1 million, it's very easy for that person to support you. But if you're poorer and you have $100 and you want to gain that critical mass, it's harder to collect the money from many individuals, Madam Chair. If you go knocking on the door, signing a petition and asking for donations, no one is going to give you that money because it's an extra cost for them. And nobody likes Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place. I think in these situations, it's harder for individuals of poorer communities to counter rich influence in these situations. So why do we regret this? Because this obviously dissolves the idea of democracy in itself. When voices are not heard, when the Supreme Court, the biggest court in the world, the most powerful court in the world, dissolves the elements of democracy, Madam Chair, this is something highly regrettable because they don't necessarily stand for democracy in a country where democracy is probably the most represented thing in the whole world. For all those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Renuka. R-E. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the floor, we would like to approach this debate in a different paradigm as opposed to what opening opposition has already offered to the floor, because we feel that the problem actually starts from the grassroots, whereby the people need education and need to understand that what they're paying for is not necessarily what they're going to be able to vote for, and that they can be represented if they vote more as opposed to just funding the campaign. So this would be our paradigm that would be a little bit different. And now I would like to outline some of the points that we would like to put forward, whereby candidates, politicians would spend, quote here, less time fundraising and more time meeting citizens and getting around with their official duties. Next, current federal contribution limits have actually not been adjusted for inflation in more than, like, what, 20 years perhaps. So while the opening opposition has already said that things would be a lot more cheaper now, in our paradigm we don't believe that, because it has actually become much more expensive, which I will elaborate further in my extensions. Next is that to elaborate further on the extension of a form of free speech that shouldn't be limited, as brought up by the opening opposition. And last but not least, that given the escalating cost of advertisements right now, I'm talking about things like TV advertisements, they are much more expensive. Individuals should be the one, capable individuals should be the one given leverage to spend and where they want to give their disposable income towards, right? It is their right where their disposable income is going towards too. And the cap is not going to stop individuals from giving the money. Rather, it's just going to set a limit. That's it. It's not going to stop them from giving money. So campaigns will still be funded. It's just that politicians have to work a little bit harder. So why not just abolish the cap altogether? And therefore, we definitely agree, and we do not regret it, that we want the cap abolishment. So, but before that, ladies and gentlemen, a few rebuttals. It harms the process of democracy. Whose democracy are you talking about? This is a democracy of the individuals that I would like to bring to light. These individuals are the ones who want to donate. Is it not their fundamental right to do so?
Yeah.
Who is it? Who are we or anyone to say anything about individuals wanting to donate? That is entirely their right. If they have the disposable income and they want to be represented in a debate and they want to be able to have a say in the campaigning, then it should be their rights. But in the end, altogether, what tallies up is the voting process. But before that, yes.
Do you think representation in any democracy should be equitable?
No. Because let's face it, if it was equitable, then there would be, sorry, if it was equitable, then you need to understand that there should not have any income disparity gap, because there already is a pre-existing income disparity gap. So I'm just saying that for those individuals who are capable, let them have that right, because it will never be equitable until everybody has the same equal economy, or what? You can go for communism altogether where everybody has the same amount and everybody pays the same amount. Is that what we're trying to do? Equality? No. Let's face it, some people have better skills. Some people are entrepreneurs. Some people have that higher amount of disposable income. So they should be able to represent themselves in a campaign. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, look at this. It is the votes that will tally up. It is the votes that will decide whether a politician comes into office or not. So why are you so worried about campaigning? It is just their way to communicate with people. Which brings me to my second rebuttal. Yes, I do agree with the POI of closing government on how advertisement is important. So let them have cake, ladies and gentlemen. Because, you see, what happens is that when there is escalating cost of advertisement, we need to give leverage to these individuals to please give their funds to the politicians that they want to see being represented in office, because this campaigning is merely a communicative method whereby it allows politicians to broadcast themselves and advertise themselves, because the world is becoming far more vast and it's becoming more and more open. So their funds should be important. And last but not least is that I would like to move instead to my preliminary outline, whereby our model is to tackle the individuals at the ground level. Let it be a more holistic approach. Understand that these individuals should be given a right, whether or not they want to give their money to a campaign or a politician that they want to see possibly succeed. Because in the end, all that matters is that what is the substance of that campaign? Because even though you splash tons of money on the campaign, but if it does not have substance, it would not be a successful campaign either, and it would not even affect the votings. But first, yeah, go ahead.
If an individual's interest is considered more because political campaigns are getting $10 million from them, is that a good thing or not?
Sorry, could you please reiterate? I'm so sorry.
If an individual's interest is considered more because political campaigns are getting $10 million from these people, is that a good thing or not?
I coincide with the fact that yes, it's not necessarily a good thing, but again, it is an infringement of a right of where you want to put your disposable income. Some people will want to buy the iPhone and they have the money, so why not buy the iPhone? Because it's your disposable income, right? So, moving on, I'd like to talk further about how candidates would actually spend less time fundraising and more time meeting citizens and getting around with their official duties. What is an official duty of a politician? To look into the issues that are being faced by the citizens, to understand what is the conditions that are happening at the ground. And, well, in all honesty, I personally feel that closing opposition believes that it should be an individual's right to be able to donate to whoever they want. And the best part, when candidates spend less time fundraising and instead of looking for people, or for example, okay, I have already five people, right? And each of them are only able to contribute 1,000. So I will still need to look for maybe like another 5 of them so that they can contribute another 5,000. So there's your 10,000. That is actually a waste of time. They are not addressing the issues at hand that people are facing. They are not looking into the socially undesirable things that are going on. They are not giving importance to that, ladies and gentlemen. They are instead focusing too much time on fundraising if a cap were to exist. And with that, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to oppose.
Wait, if anyone is offering a POI, just speak up a bit. Like, it's kind of difficult to hear you guys.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the United States of America, for an individual to partake in the primary elections, you need to have at least $5,000 to ensure that when you give it to the party members, they're able to assist you with your basic campaigns. I never thought that my first issue in a debate like this would probably be going along the lines of asking a question of, does money have an impact on voters' behavior? That's the first thing I'm going to identify. And secondly, the thing I'm going to talk about is that, is your right to contribute an absolute right, and what has the Supreme Court done in retrospect to that? Let's deal with this first issue, right? Before that, let's take a step back. Let's look at opening opposition. This is their case. An individual has the right to donate and contribute whatever amounts of money or whatever sums of money to an individual or campaign because it's their money. The harm that they said did not exist because the utilitarian argument is like, if there is no harm, thus the right can't be taken away. This is clearly what Ashok talked about. So in trying to prove this point in absolutism, they came up here and told us that because there is no impact of money in politics, there is no actual harm. So it's a bit of a circular argumentation. So because there is no harm, you can't take away their right. I'm going to tell you why. Don't know why I'm telling you this at your age, right? Money has an impact on voters' behavior. So let's look at what Elo said. He said, good luck proving this. 2 things. Number 1, let's look at the principal friction. Let's just technical attacks, right? Let's look at this. First and foremost, if money does not have an impact in this debate, there is no point having this debate because the discussion on the pros and cons on the cap is then moot. Secondly, if there is no impact, why has corporate funding been either capped or banned? Clearly, when you have entities with loads amounts of money coming and saying that I want you to specifically vote in this manner in Congress and design that lucrative fund going into your pocket is to change your mindset of how they perceive these corporate institutions. Clearly, when it comes to money, it can change people's mind. I have a prostitute argument, but let's just leave it as that, right? Let's go on to the second thing. There is a naivety of this understanding of how and what advertising is. Let's look at what money does. Clearly, it's not that if I give you money, you will vote for me. It's the impact of how money affects your campaign. When you have money, a loads amount of money coming into your campaign, you have tons of exposure. You're looking at airtime, looking at radio, looking at television advertisements, and looking for tours. And this is not Lincoln Park's tour, yeah? You go to these states, every single one of them, a Democratic rally or Republican rally, you sit down there and you have Mr. Joe, the pipe plumber, asking Obama, why are you taking my cash and please justify this to me? This access is there because the money that comes in with regards to contribution, banks roll these individuals to constantly move from one state to the other to allow individuals to access and have exposure to other people to tell them what their ideas are. So when it comes to the idea of does money have an impact on your campaign, it does. Because a lot amount of money coming into your campaign means the bigger your campaign can be, the more access you have to a lot of other people, rural or individuals who are living in the urban areas. Now, let's just give you another example. Material distribution, flyers,
comparative causes, politician A versus politician B, because he talked about the misinformation thing, right? Clear enough, opening government said that, there's a counter narrative, but clearly there's a check and balance, right? If you have one person claiming this is the truth, obviously, and he's lying about it, you have another person coming out with the free market of ideas saying that this is not true, these are the facts. There is the reality, and you need people to hold a piece of paper, to see what's on the paper, to see that, hey, look, I have to look at it because I'm now holding this piece of paper. This costs money. This doesn't come out from just a tree, cut the tree, paper come out. You have to use money in order for you to actually have an investment. That money and contribution is an investment to this politician to expand their campaign. So when it comes to this idea, whether or not there is a problem, we say yes. The comparison is this. The disparity of wealth, which is where closing government comes in. There is a constant exacerbation of the disparity of wealth because you cannot have individuals who are not rich trying to compete and accommodate equal airtime with people who are poor or cannot mobilize under the argumentations we talked about. Why is this harmful? Because the type of impact that you're talking about is not equal impact. Because they keep saying, oh, there's one vote, here's another vote, you have equal votes, you can have an impact. It doesn't work that way. It's about equitable airtime, where individuals who try to band together can challenge individuals who singularly has a lot of money and can impact this kind of campaigns. That said, I've told you why, and I've given you standards of how money can influence politics. I don't know why I did this, right? Let's go on to the second one. Is your right absolute? Is your right to contribute absolute? And what has the Supreme Court done? Let's look at the reality of why we reject and why we regret what the Supreme Court has done. This is a rubber stamp. It is a branding. It is a continuation of the exacerbation of the disparity levels between individuals who are capable, closing opposition's argument, of trying to contribute into the campaigns and individuals who are not capable. Of course, the sugar quote is that everyone can give as much money as they can give, but that is the reality. I only have 3,000 ringgit in my bank. Okay, I have a lot of money, but it's not that much compared to Bill Gates, who has like 75 billion US dollars and he can give as much as he wants. So the idea is that he gives you the carrot that you can contribute as much as you want and you can impact the campaign as much as you want. But the realities are you're incapable of doing so because you're not part of the elite group of individuals who owns the world, where the 2% makes up the entirety of trying to solve poverty in Africa. That is the reality of how people don't have money. Yes.
But voters who don't agree with the politician's political position will still not vote for him, no matter how much airtime he has.
Ayo, repeating the argument doesn't mean it makes sense lah. If people come up and say that I don't like this person, the harm is already done. You're saying that the check and balance is people will remove them from power. But the point is they've already been voted into power. That means all the policies that he talked about earlier with regards to progressive taxation that's supposed to help people for equitable manner, the poorer people, is not going to fly because these people are already in Congress. So you cannot come up here and say there's no harm. Saying it's no harm and deny it doesn't mean there is no harm, Ashok. Debating 101. Let's look at what CEO talked. Nothing new, only one simple idea. They said everyone should be able to contribute. Closing opposition came up and said capable individuals should do it. But people who are not capable, they can't. That is the reality. There's a friction between opening and closing. But this is the problem. This same case alienates people who cannot compete with people who are much richer. This is the reality. If I do not have enough money to compete with Bill Gates, I can never have the same amount of voice or impact with Bill Gates. I'm not saying that Bill Gates must come and say, oh, here, I'm only going to give $300, you also give $300. But the reality is, when you have a Supreme Court that's supposed to protect everyone, that is where the Supreme Court comes and rubber stamps that I say how much you give, this is the right amount, you can no longer be abused.
I can demonstrate for this speech, and I'd like to invite opposition.
Yeah.
Ahura. AHOORA. Okay, Ms. Speaker and the members of the House, this cap has constantly and always been an infringement on human rights, both on the donor side and the person receiving it for his federal campaign side. The amount donated is the decision of the individual, and if you put a limit on it, a cap on it, you're going against his human rights. Okay, see, I have a right to go to a school, But whether I want to go an international school or not, you can't tell me that I can't go to an international school, I have to attend a government school. It is a matter of choice, and at the end of it, every human has his own choice, and that cannot be taken away from him because he's a human and it's part of your human rights. Secondly, the decision taken to donate to the specific campaign was made due to the office runner's ability to attract the donations in the first place. Say the person running for office is a really charismatic individual. You can't deny the fact that he has attracted the attention of the donors that are donating to his campaign to make him run for the president or the prime minister in the first place. Okay, saying that, quoting this morning's debate in my room, it's politics is an extrovert's game, and the extroverts who earn their donors by convincing skills and charisma deserve it, and a cap on it will again and yet again infringe on the rights as a human being. Okay, let's say if money makes these elections or campaigns run around, which it clearly doesn't, the British American Tobacco, instead of donating a bomb load as a whole, if the cap is implemented, they may just say to their employees that, okay, here's the cash, you go and donate it one by one, which will amount to the total donation at the end of it. And that is not the story over here. The story isn't that the cap is to be abolished or the cap is to be implemented. What is that humans, the citizens of the country, should be educated on the matter that the cap needs not be abolished. People need to be made aware that their vote counts more than any amount of money that is splashed to make either one of the politicians look good. Be it the good party or not, the citizens should be able to discriminate for themselves whether this person is reliable, is this person worthy for my vote, that I'm voting for him to stay in power. They shouldn't be immature enough. Say their voting age is 18 or 21 in the countries of this world. A person 18 or 21 should be mature enough to know that a person who has a good campaign need not be the person who is worthy of your vote and worthy to stay in power in this case. And this educational system can be implemented instead of a cap on these donations. You could spread awareness instead of splashing cash. Or, yeah, you're splashing cash into these ridiculous campaigns. Okay, the person has the rights to vote. Yes?
You want them to do their work, but unfortunately, to get into the position of power, they have to do this fundraising first to get money to get into power.
If a person is going to be capable of implementing this educational system in the first place, he will have a legitimate way of getting into power without buying his voters. Dear closing government. Okay, so this person, if he is capable of implementing and spreading awareness in every single citizen's minds, he should be able to win their votes without the need for money. And I don't see why side government has always thought that money makes it go around. Okay, say I cannot say that I donate $1,000 more than the person who is voting once and I get 2 votes. At the end of it, you have 1 vote. Whether you spend 10 million on the campaign or you spend $1 on the campaign, at the end of it, what counts is that you know who you're voting for, or the person who you're voting for is capable to run the government or not.
If one politician has access to $10 million, then barrages the individual for their vote with advertising and all kinds of material, in comparison to politician being with $1,000 worth that kind of material, who do you probably think is going to have the bigger impact?
That is when this awareness that I've mentioned comes again. If the awareness is spread to the individual, he will know whether the person who is taunting him with the $10 million, does he have the right to run the government, or the person with $1,000 who has a legitimate claim to run the government in the nation.
Where does this awareness come from?
This awareness comes from if the government changes the school syllabus and implements studies to know I think there is psychology in college, if I'm not mistaken, that you know what a person's, say, notions are when you talk to them and you see what they have displayed in their behaviors and so on and so forth.
These schools, are they public schools or private schools?
If you go into power, you can make that change yourself, whether you want it to be implemented in public schools or private schools. Because at the end of it, what runs a country is the citizens. What is democracy? Democracy is for the people and by the people, and not with money. If it was not democracy, you could start your own, say, path and name it something after money instead of democracy. Because democracy is for the people and the people run it, not money. And money is not what's going to run the world around every day. The people have this choice in their own hands. With that, I proudly oppose. Thank you.
Alright, everyone.